This is the world this weekend. Good evening, I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Tonight, Republicans say the Biden administration was too slow in responding to a suspected Chinese spy balloon.
And the message embedded in this to the world is we can fly a balloon over airspace of the United States of America, and they won't be able to do anything about it.
Also tonight, the complicated legacy of former Pakistan leader Pervez Musharraf.
Were his intentions good? Perhaps. Was the net result completely what would have been desirable? Not necessarily.
And First Ministers prepare to tackle Canada's healthcare crisis.
We've seen a large number of surgeries and diagnostics being delayed or cancelled. That has created a lot of stress for families and people.
That's later, but first. The suspected spy balloon's cross-continental journey has come to a close, but tensions between Washington and Beijing are ongoing. Beijing opposes the U.S. decision to shoot down the balloon, and politicians and security experts are warning the incident is a possible sign of what's to come. Rafi Boudjikanian reports.
On Chinese state television, a news anchor reads a statement from China's foreign ministry denouncing Washington's actions, claiming the device Americans destroyed was just a weather balloon knocked off course by the wind.
Our main concern is the safety of the national airspace.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is having none of it. In fact, the Americans had planted down the balloon since last Wednesday, but Buttigieg says the military had reason to take its time.
They have to consider the safety of the American people. The president called for this to be dealt with in a way that balanced all of the different risks.
He says the debris from the incident scattered over 11 kilometers, but while the government is boasting about making short work of the balloon, for the Republicans, its presence sparks a long list of questions.
What is unprecedented is a balloon flight that entered over Idaho and flew over Montana, over all these sensitive military installations.
Marco Rubio is their vice chair of the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee.
And the message embedded in this to the world is we can fly a balloon over airspace of the United States of America, and they won't be able to do anything about it to stop us.
In a statement, the U.S. Defense Department points out Chinese balloons transited through U.S. airspace at least 3 times during Donald Trump's presidency.
This is a different order of magnitude.
Elbridge Colby worked in the Defense Department under Trump.
The takeaway for both Americans and Canadians is that the People's Liberation Army, the military of the People's Republic of China, is not simply an enormous regional challenge in the Western Pacific, but also is going to have the ability to challenge and threaten, if it wants to, North America.
What we need to do.
One Canadian expert says Canada needs to be better prepared in case China sends a missile rather than a balloon.
The Chinese are effectively signaling that if we make policy decisions that happen to displease the Chinese regime, it could take aggressive action against us.
Christian Leuprecht teaches political science at the Royal Military College at Queen's University.
Currently, Canada does not have capabilities to intercept this type of device at the height at which such a device is flying. So in essence, we don't have any capabilities to defend our sovereign airspace.
Ottawa says it played its part, helping the U.S. track down this device's movements through the 2 countries' joint North American Aerospace Defense Command. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
Pervez Musharraf, the former president of Pakistan, has died at the age of 79. He was in office from 2001 to 2008 and was considered a key ally in the U.S.-led war on terror that came in the wake of 9/11. He was also seen as a controversial figure who used the military to quell dissent. As Philip Lee Shannock reports, Musharraf was divisive to many in Canada, too.
Mohammed Aman is head of one of the largest Pakistani community groups in Canada. The Toronto Realtor says he's hearing mixed reactions to Musharraf's death from the almost 63,000 members.
There's the mixed sentiments among the Pakistanis at the moment. There's some negative and positive, both kind of remarks as well.
Aman says he will remember Musharraf, who came to power in 1999 in a bloodless coup, as a general who provided decisive leadership during a time of uncertainty for Pakistan.
To fight terrorism in all its forms, wherever it exists.
After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, despite domestic opposition, Musharraf supported the U.S. war on terror in Afghanistan. Aman says that decision helped Pakistan's economy.
Yeah, at that time, Pakistan was really in deep trouble. Pakistan was about to collapse. And because of participating in that war, Pakistan benefited.
He gave Pakistan a few good years economically because of the flow of American assistance.
Hussein Haqqani is Pakistan's former ambassador to the United States. He says Musharraf's legacy is complex.
There are those who would argue that he continuously played a double game. He was trying to get American military and economic assistance and wanted to drag out the process of eliminating terrorism.
Sajan Gohel is the International Security Director at the Asia Pacific Foundation in London, England. He says contradictory is a very apt way to sum up Musharraf's legacy.
He was seen as a key ally in the war on terrorism post 9/11. But at the same time, he did many things that created further problems for counterterrorism and also for Pakistan.
Gohel says Musharraf's authoritarian actions weakened Pakistan's democratic institutions. He twice circumvented the constitution, interfered in elections and judicial decisions.
He stands accused of having turned a blind eye to the assassination of former Pakistan Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto.
In later years, he attempted a political comeback despite failing health. Musharraf died in Dubai after a prolonged illness. He is survived by his wife and their 3 children. To many Pakistani Canadians, Musharraf will be remembered as a pivotal and polarizing figure in Pakistan's history. Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
Iran's supreme leader has reportedly pardoned tens of thousands of prisoners, including some arrested for participating in anti-government protests. But those pardons come with a lot of conditions. Only those who are not accused of espionage, murder, assault, arson, or destruction of state property will be pardoned. The measure will also not apply to dual nationals. Anti-government demonstrations in the country have become less frequent in recent weeks since Iranian authorities began hanging prisoners. Human rights advocates say at least 500 people have died in connection with the protests, and at least 20,000 people have been arrested. Millions of Canadians don't have a family doctor, and operations and diagnostic tests have been put on hold. Healthcare has become one of this country's biggest issues. Premiers are meeting this week with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to see if they can agree on a large injection of cash to fix the system. Marina von Stackelberg reports on what to expect.
And I always thought it would be easy to find somebody else to come here because it's a pretty neat place to live and neat place to practice.
Dr. Peter Bell is one of just 2 family doctors in the small village of Sharbet Lake, about 120 kilometers southwest of Ottawa. He's 80 years old.
Well, I'm getting close to the time to retire.
But he can't find a replacement.
There is a huge shortage now, and it's very competitive anywhere in the country, anywhere in the province, to find new physicians.
And Bell doesn't want to leave 1,000 patients without a doctor.
A large percentage of them are elderly, and a lot of them have complex health issues.
It's estimated 1 in 5 Canadians don't have a family physician, just one of the many issues facing this country's struggling healthcare system, and that Canada's premiers say needs billions more in federal funding to fix. They hope to get closer to that money this week when they meet with the Prime Minister. Healthcare is a provincial responsibility, but is partially funded by the federal government. Jean-Yves Duclos is the health minister.
The money comes from the same pockets, from the same taxpayers, and serves the same people for the same purposes.
The premiers want Ottawa to go from contributing 22% toward the cost of healthcare to 35%. That would be a significant increase from $28 billion a year to more than $45 billion. Speaking on CBC's Rosemary Barton Live, Duclos maintains Ottawa and the provinces need to agree on common priorities for more money to start flowing.
We first must acknowledge that A, we must repair the damage caused by COVID-19, but B, we must prepare for the challenges that we know are with us and will be with us in the next years and decades.
Along with keeping and recruiting family doctors and healthcare workers, Ottawa wants provinces to reduce procedure backlogs, improve mental health services, and change how healthcare data is shared inside provinces and across the country. It's also expected to be tailored for regional needs.
Well, we have a number of healthcare priorities in BC, and I don't assume that our priorities are the same as other provinces.
David Eby is British Columbia's premier.
And so we think we can get to a deal quite quickly with the federal government once the premiers are all on side about the broad outlines of the deal, which is what's going to happen at this sit-down.
A final deal is not expected this week, but Eby hopes premiers will still leave with a better idea of what dollar amount the federal government is willing to spend. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ottawa has confirmed a Canadian military aircraft has been deployed over Haiti to address what it calls a dire security situation. It's a Royal Canadian Air Force long-range patrol aircraft, and its use comes after Haiti's request for help. The CP-140 Aurora will provide intelligence and reconnaissance to bolster efforts to combat Haitian gang activity. The increasing violence in Haiti has left hundreds of people dead and thousands displaced. Authorities in Italy are warning thousands of computer servers around the world have been targeted by ransomware hackers. The National Cybersecurity Agency says the attack was aimed at exploiting a software vulnerability. Servers have been compromised as far away as Canada and the U.S. Officials say dozens of Italian companies are likely to have been affected. This July, NATO will meet for a key summit where it hopes to welcome 2 new member states, Finland and Sweden. But another member, Turkey, is holding those plans hostage, threatening to block Sweden's NATO bid after a far-right activist burned a copy of the Quran in Stockholm. For more on Sweden's possible way forward into NATO, I spoke with Kalle Håkansson. He's an associate fellow with the Swedish Institute for International Affairs in Stockholm. I started by asking him how Turkey is attempting to block Sweden from joining NATO.
So last year at the Madrid NATO summit, Sweden signed this trilateral agreement, and we have seen that the Swedish government have gone quite a long way to fulfill these obligations that were set up at this trilateral memorandum. However, we can see that it has been a very delicate situation the last couple of weeks, where Turkey have been very critical on Swedish policy. Turkey is asking, for instance, the Swedish authorities to extradite some Swedish nationals to Turkey, and the Swedish government have said that this is a legal process that needs to be taken in Swedish courts and so on. We have also seen a very heated debate about freedom of expression. For instance, in Sweden, we had a Quran that was burned outside the Turkish embassy in Stockholm, and this has made the process much harder. But we must also, I think, have in mind that the demands from Turkey and President Erdogan is also connected to internal politics in Turkey in the run-up to their national elections now in May.
On Thursday, this past Thursday, both Finland and Sweden's prime ministers publicly committed to joining NATO together. Should Finland get accepted without Sweden, what would that mean for Sweden? How bad would that be?
I would say that this would be a suboptimal situation both from a Swedish perspective, but also for the NATO alliance as a whole. So the Swedish decision to kind of seek membership in NATO was, of course, connected and should be seen in light of Russia's illegal war against Ukraine and the kind of worsened security situation in Europe. So we see that the Swedish government have, however, underlined that Sweden is more secure now than it was before the process of joining NATO. And this is due to kind of the security guarantees or statements that states like the US, UK, France, and the other Nordic states, among others, have given Sweden and Finland in this process. However, it is very important to kind of note and underline that it is first when you are a NATO member state that the formal Article 5 guarantees within the alliance kick in, so to say. And I also think that from a NATO perspective, we can see that if Finland would join NATO, but not Sweden, we see that it would be harder to kind of defend Finland without the Swedish territory. So that's a reason why it's very important for an alliance as well.
Well, I guess that leads to the question, who benefits the most from Sweden joining NATO, Sweden or NATO?
So in the short perspective, Sweden probably sees the greatest advantage of joining NATO in that sense. However, in the longer perspective, I would say it's more mutually benefiting. The alliance gets 2 countries that are well prepared, have well trained armed forces, and also been close partners to NATO for quite some time now. And they have also quite advanced defense industrial capabilities, for instance.
We also know that NATO has an open-door policy. What Turkey's doing right now seems to fly in the face of that. And how would you say that makes NATO look?
This is, of course, an aspect where other actors in the world kind of looks upon and sees kind of the cracks within the alliance, and that's the reason why I think that other kind of key NATO member states, such as the US or the UK, will probably get more vocal and kind of push Turkey to drop their resistance against Sweden in their NATO bid. And I still think that Sweden and Finland could maybe become members at the NATO summit this summer.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Kalle Hakkason is an associate fellow with the Swedish Institute for International Affairs. We reached him in Stockholm. And this morning on Rosemary Barton Live, Finland's Foreign Minister, Pekka Haavisto, addressed his country's dual NATO bid with Sweden. He says it's imperative the two countries join the military alliance as one.
We need both Finland and Sweden for improved security, and we have a very strong, not only history, but also bilateral military cooperation. And if you look risks in this region, we are facing very similar risks with Sweden.
Meanwhile, the European Union is taking new steps to cut its energy ties with Russia. Starting today, all 27 EU countries will ban imports of Russian gasoline, diesel, and other oil products. The EU, along with the G7 and other allies, are also putting a price cap on Russian oil products, barring other countries from buying the products at more than $100 per barrel. These measures are meant to strike a blow to the Kremlin's coffers, limiting Russia's ability to finance its war effort in Ukraine. Canada's economic sanctions against Russia were supposed to target wealthy oligarchs and government officials. But now some Russians living in Canada say tens of thousands of dollars of their personal savings have been caught up and frozen too. Janice McGregor reports.
I have all my plans around Canada. I don't want to go anywhere else.
Svetlana's employer transferred her from Moscow to Toronto in 2021. We've agreed not to reveal her last name to protect her company and her from harassment. But she's now a permanent resident in Canada. She was hoping for a less stressful life until Vladimir Putin's troops invaded Ukraine.
And when we got the news, I was having a dinner with my friend, Ukrainian. So I got back home and he texted me, do not read anything. Do not open news feeds. Like, just don't do it.
But of course she did.
And then night full of tears.
At 3 a.m, she contacted her bank manager back in Russia to start pulling her savings out. Svetlana's little nest egg, about $39,000, well, it never made it to her Canadian account because hours later, the Trudeau government put her financial institution, Alpha Bank, on its list of sanctioned Russian entities.
They do not communicate. They do not provide any time estimations during such uncertain times. It's just something that makes me feel even more depressed. It's really hard to say goodbye to your hard-earned money.
My immigration now not so pleasant.
Daria and her husband moved to Canada from Kazakhstan. They're working and raising 2 kids in Winnipeg. We're holding back her last name to shield them, too. They don't support Putin's war either.
My mother is Ukrainian.
The couple left the proceeds from the sale of their previous home with her brother back in Kazakhstan. Last spring, the only bank that was available to transfer these funds to them in Canada assured her brother that it wasn't subject to Russian sanctions, but that turned out to be wrong. And now the money they need for a down payment to get a mortgage in Canada is missing in transit. Frozen, they assume, by the Canadian government.
Now it has been 10 months and we have nothing. Just one sentence that we will, your application will be considered.
They are really being treated as collateral damage.
Trade lawyer John Bascario believes there are hundreds of cases like this now on Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly's desk. People looking for exemptions for their personal savings.
They're caught up in the crossfire of these sanctions measures, and it's not fair that they have to now go through the process of figuring out what the law is, possibly retain a sanctions lawyer, make a permit application.
Our goal is to really target
Putin and his enablers.
Minister Joly says her officials will work on a case-by-case basis.
And we want to make sure that we have a human approach.
But these women and two others interviewed by CBC News say they're struggling to learn anything from global affairs. And unlike wealthy oligarchs, they can't afford lawyers to navigate the bureaucracy and fight to release their funds. Janice McGregor, CBC News, Ottawa.
At least 24 people are dead and close to 1,000 others injured as a result of raging wildfires in Chile. Firefighters battled dozens of fires along the country's Pacific coastline. The blazes have engulfed around 270,000 hectares of land, making it one of Chile's worst natural disasters in years. President Gabriel Boric has issued a state of emergency in 3 rural southern regions where most of the damage has been inflicted. The European Union is facing pressure to take its firefighting and prevention efforts to another level. Last summer was Europe's hottest ever, and the resulting wildfires pushed the EU's capabilities beyond its limits. Alison Roberts has more from Lisbon.
I think the most shocking findings from the 2022 report that the last 8 years have been the 8 warmest years on record.
Officials at the EU Copernicus Climate Change Service sounding the alarm about greenhouse gas emissions. Last year's wildfire season in the EU broke records with 800,000 hectares of forest and farmland burning. 1/10 of that was in Portugal, even though it accounts for only a tiny fraction of the EU's land area. Portugal's largest natural park, the Serra da Estrela, for example, was scarred by a fire that burned for a week and a half. Officials from across the bloc gathered in Lisbon to discuss the lessons of last summer and to brace for what Portugal's Minister of Interior, José Luís Carneiro, suggested is a grim future.
2022 was a difficult year, but it's probable, very probable, that the coming years will be even more difficult. Very high temperatures, long droughts, strong winds, and very low humidity.
Last summer, EU states could call on fellow members for help, above all firefighting aircraft, via the EU's civil protection mechanism, as well as the EU's own reserve of a dozen planes and 1 helicopter. But these weren't always available at the speed or scale needed, so there's pressure for a larger and more strategically placed force. Evermore, the minister stressed, we must prepare for summer in the fall and winter. Janez Lenarčič, the EU's Commissioner for Crisis Management, admitted that last summer's extraordinary display of solidarity by member states nevertheless fell short and that conditions are worsening.
We mobilized everything we had, and it was hardly enough. So we all need to do more at the national level and also at the European level.
Each member state is expected to have reasonable capacity in place, he said, but major disasters can overwhelm even the best prepared. So the European Commission plans to double the size of the bloc's reserve fleet.
A lot of member states have signaled their interest to host part of that European level capacity. So that makes me optimistic that yes, we will have this capacity in place on time before fire season.
This is not spending but investment, he stressed, citing a World Bank study showing that €1 spent on fire prevention saves 10 in damage, and last season saw some $2.9 billion in fire damage. The meeting here also saw a focus on prevention, with an EU action plan to be finalised within weeks. Alison Roberts for CBC News, Lisbon.
The Pope's 3-day visit to South Sudan came to an end today.
The Lord be with you. Blessed is the name of the Lord. Our help is in the name of the Lord. Amen.
Pope Francis ended the trip with a large open-air mass in the capital of Juba to a crowd of around 70,000 people. In his speech, he urged people to end ethnic hatred and to raise their voices against injustice. South Sudan has dealt with conflict and poverty since it gained independence 12 years ago. It's also one of 67 countries where homosexuality is illegal.
Questo non è giusto. Le persone di tendenze omosessuali.
This is not right, the Pope said on his return flight, calling the criminalization of LGBTQ people a sin and an injustice. You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel.
Skin-a-ma-rinky-dinky-dink, skin-a-ma-rinky-doo, I love you.
For many Canadians, that song probably brings up comforting memories of preschool. But a new Canadian horror film is turning that nostalgia into nightmare fuel. In Skin-a-ma-rink, two young siblings wake up in the middle of the night, their parents missing, while the doors and windows to their house begin to vanish into thin air. Made on a micro-budget, the movie has made more than $1.5 million at the North American box office. As Jackson Weaver reports, that's thanks to some accidental viral marketing.
When Edmonton filmmaker Kyle Edward Ball made Skin-a-ma-rink for a ridiculously low budget of $15,000, he never thought it would get a wide release, let alone become one of the most viral movies in recent memory.
I watched the horror movie that's traumatizing everyone on TikTok right now.
This is the scene in Skin-a-ma-rink that, as a horror lover, scared the crap out of me.
Skin-a-ma-rink.
Skin-a-ma-rink.
I've now seen Skin-a-ma-rink.
After a film festival screener leaked online last year, horror fans latched onto Skin-a-ma-rink, making thousands of TikToks calling it the scariest movie of the year. It's a kind of social media phenomenon that can spell success for the comparably low-budget horror movies. Last year, the Taiwanese movie The Incantation got the same treatment.
This was literally the scariest movie titled on TikTok. This movie called Incantation.
And killer doll film Megan made box office bank thanks to a dance clip going viral in 2022. But filmmaker and horror history professor Chris Alexander explains it's a grassroots version of something movie studios have been doing for decades.
They called them C movies. If the poster said, see this, see this, see this, or the word dare, 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 I mean, kids were lining up in droves to dare themselves, to push themselves out of their comfort zones and experience the unexperienceable.
What's different here is the kind of movie Skin-a-ma-rink is. Most of the film is nearly pitch black. There are no real characters or much of a clear plot. Characters only show up on screen for 10 minutes of the 100-minute runtime, and it's so hard to tell what Skin-a-ma-rink is actually about. Whole message boards have sprung up to debate it. Talking to CBC's Q, Ball said the movie already earning over $1.5 million during a limited theatrical release is a point of pride.
Audiences are way more willing to watch something experimental and way more intelligent than a lot of, I think, pretentious filmmakers would give them credit for. Yeah, just audiences are way cooler than a lot of filmmakers would have you believe.
But Skin-a-ma-rink's sudden success has been a double-edged sword.
This movie might be the closest movie we'll ever get to watching paint actually dry.
Many viewers were convinced to watch the movie by posts calling it terrifying. But when they encountered a niche art house horror film, Toronto critic Sean Kelly says they understandably felt misled.
It is indeed setting up for negative reviews, and I've already read negative reviews on the film.
That reaction could worsen as Skin-a-ma-rink hits streaming, which might hurt the movie's reputation long-term and discourage future horror filmmakers from taking an experimental approach. Jackson Weaver, CBC News, Toronto.
The biggest night in music is back. The 65th Grammys are tonight, and there's a lot of focus on the coveted Album of the Year award. Adele's Easy on Me is up for it, but if she wins, we might see a repeat of 2017.
I can't possibly accept this award, and I'm very humbled and I'm very grateful and gracious, but my artist of my life is Beyoncé.
I'm one of one. I'm number one. I'm the only one.
Beyoncé leads this year's nomination list with 9, and she's closing in on a record. She already has 28 Grammys, the most of any female artist or singer. The only person with more in total is the late Hungarian conductor Georg Solti at 31. With all all respect to Schulte, he probably could never have sold out arenas like Queen Bee. The demand for tickets to her recently announced world tour has already exceeded supply by 800%, according to Live Nation. But for all the accolades and achievements, Beyoncé doesn't have a Grammy for Record or Album of the Year. Tonight, that could change.
We're gonna roll up tonight. Black lights, spaceships fly.
So here's a little more from Beyoncé. This one goes out to Adele. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.